Good morning, dear friends. Chodesh Tov. It is Friday, the first day of the second Adar, Rosh Chodesh Adar, the second day of Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni, which is otherwise known as the first day of Adar, March 4th. We are gathered here to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line, two letters at least at a time. Presently, Maseches Shabbos, page 106, and just about 106b. We're talking about trapping. And by extension, we have the opportunity to talk all about not modern zoos, but bavariums. And we're going to continue talking about bavariums and what makes an animal to be considered trapped. And unfortunately, at a time where the world seems like a zoo, and we daven, of course, and dedicate our learning for the schus, the stability and the protection, especially we're allowed to be biased for our brothers and sisters in the world. They should be protected and let this situation come to a miraculous close before even more heartbreak, loss, and damage. But that's what we're learning about. And so we're dedicating our learning as well for the dear members of our Chabura and their households, those on the front side of the camera, the back side of the camera. And we daven for only good health and happiness and prosperity and koyach to continue our journey through the Talmud. I also want to mention two dear friends, Leah Basrita, Malka Basrivka, and all those who need a refuah should be abundance of good, healthy, happy news. So I'm going to share the screen and we're going to talk about our bavariums. And we're going to find out that not only did we, in our experience, I'm going to hit mute all at the request of our dear Beryl. Always welcome to unmute for comments, questions, etc. As we discussed yesterday, Professor Stern tells us that in Russia, or in the Russian language, a Bavarian would describe what we might call a what's the word? Like a private aquarium that holds, or a thing that would contain snakes, reptiles, and that kind of thing. Others talked about a Bavarium sounding more like a zoo, while yet other descriptions seem to describe a Bavarium as more like a safari, not a literal safari, but the kind of commercialized safari situations where the animals run wild and the humans have a protected corridor or protected ability to go through it. And so we really have many different definitions of Bavarium. And yesterday we were kind of wondering, okay, which one is the correct definition? As we'll see today, the Gemara itself is aware that Bavarium is a broad term. There are different sizes, different styles, and that might be the explanation of why we have what sounds like conflicting texts, either describing an animal in a Bavarium, a bivar, as being trapped or as being untrapped. And of course, there are vast hashlachot, there are vast implications, or vastly differing implications, depending on if we consider an animal to be trapped or not, especially on Yontif, but not exclusively on Yontif. On Yontif, it's relevant because if it's already trapped, you could slaughter it, you could feed it, it's not muksa. Whereas if it is not trapped, you can't slaughter it, you can't touch it, you can't feed it. On Shabbos, the issue is more essentially, have you done the act of trapping on Shabbos or not? And so again, just to say this whole thing over in a different way, two texts which give differing impressions on when an animal is considered trapped or not, and our Gemara is on a journey to try to figure out the apparent contradictions. And as we know, when the Gemara has two texts that are contradictory, sometimes the way to resolve the contradiction will say the two texts are broadcasting two different voices, two different opinions in the Mishnah. That is one method of resolving a dispute, a machlokes, or apparent contradiction. Other times, we can resolve the contradiction by explaining that although they sound like they are describing identical scenarios, in truth, they are not. And so we're going to actually go through both potential ways of resolving it, just like we did not long ago. Shalom Aleichem. Alon, you brought these guys, or they're visiting? Beautiful, welcome. All right. So let's share the screen. Let's get started. Here we go. Hold on, we're almost there. So the Mishnah, just here. Trapping birds are in X kind of containment. A deer in the home. Chachamim say, yeah, a bird has to be in a cage. But if a deer is in the garden, it is also considered trapped. Rabbi Gamliel made the point, which I guess I said the Gemara makes, but you're right. Rabbi Gamliel makes it too. There are different types of bevarim. The Gemara is going to elaborate. The Gemara now quotes for us a brisa that sounds very different, I think it's a brisa. I'm sorry, a Mishnah. This is a different Mishnah in Maseches Beya, which describes how you cannot trap fish, but it's not but you're allowed to catch a animal and a bird because they're already trapped essentially. And then we bring a Tosefta which says that you're not allowed to catch birds and animals in a bivarium, and so they sound like a contradiction. A Mishnah that says you may not trap them, a brisa that says you may trap them because they are already trapped. So Gemara says, how would we explain away? Again, we did this yesterday, just giving a fast recap. How would we explain the difference between the two texts about an animal? One saying that a chaya is considered trapped, one saying that it is not considered trapped. Haloi kasha harav Yehuda harabanan. This will be the distinction between the two opinions in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, an animal is not trapped. Chaya is not trapped until it's in your house. If it's in the garden, if it's outside, it's not considered trapped. And so the Mishnah says that you're not allowed, that's considered trapping. Ein sadim. And the Chachamim say that it's considered trapped even if it's in a garden, which sounds like a vivarium, and therefore they say that you may catch it because it's already caught, it's already trapped. And the oifes kasha. How are we going to understand the difference of opinion regarding birds? The Mishnah says that you are not allowed to catch them, and the Brisa says, or the Tosefta says you can. So the Gemara answers, it's not a problem. The distinction is going to be bevar mikora, bevar shena mikora. If the bird sanctuary is roofed in, they can't fly out, well, then they're already trapped. And so therefore, on Yontif, you're allowed to handle them because they've already been trapped. But if there's no roof on it, the bird can fly away, well, then it's not considered trapped. And therefore, if you try to chop it, you're doing the act of tzeda, you're doing the act of trapping, and until that point, it is free to go. So Gemara says this is going to be a little bit of a problem. Why? Let's think about it. The original Mishnah, Shabbos, welcome. Our Mishnah, that says that a bird, even if it's in your house, it's untrapped. That does not sound consistent with an attempt to say that if there's a roof on your vivarium, the bird is trapped. If a bird is not even trapped in your house, certainly it's not considered trapped if it's in a larger enclosure. I don't know if it still exists. When I was a kid, there was a place called Parrot Jungle. Anyone familiar with Parrot Jungle?
Yeah. Yes.
So
I think it still exists.
I think it still exists.
Yeah, I think it's a Coconut Creek, or it's like somewhere a little bit north of here, I think.
I think the parrots are different parrots, but I think
So anyways, Parrot Jungle is a place where you can go and the birds are flying around, but they're enclosed, but it's a pretty big open space. So do you consider those to be trapped or not? Well, tachlis.
I think they have the same thing with Monkey Jungle also. You walk in a corridor and they're running around.
Similar idea. The monkeys, I think there's a little more distance between the humans and the monkeys, and for a good reason, I think so. But it's a general idea. So I'm just thinking about the birds for a moment. Are those birds free or not? Well, on one hand, they cannot go anywhere. They're contained in Parrot Jungle. But on the other hand, you cannot say that you could just stick your hand into the cage and take it. And so that's essentially our question. Okay, so a bird is in an enclosed, place. It can't just go away, but it also has a relative freedom within this enclosure. And so we attempted to explain that a bevar mikora, if there's a roof, it's enclosed. If it's a Parrot Jungle, it's trapped. Now, if there's no roof, the birds can fly anywhere, then it's not considered trapped. The Gemara challenges that based on our Mishnah, which has a bias to Mekorahu, and everybody agrees that the bird has to be in a cage or it is untrapped. Again, Bein Rabbi Yehuda, Bein Rabbanan, The bird needs to be in a chest, a cage. The reason why I think that migdal doesn't literally mean cage, but Rabbi Steinsaltz translates it as a chest or a cage is because I suspect the time of the Gemara, they didn't have a market, they didn't have cages. So you kind of had to improvise if you wanted to capture your bird and you put it into some other kind of receptacle. I may be wrong, but that's what I suspect. So how are we going to resolve an apparent contradiction if trapping the bird on Yontif, if a bird is considered trapped or not? One saying it is considered to be trapping or trapped, another not. Rabba Baravuna gave a different explanation, and we actually read these lines yesterday and said we'd pick up today. Hacha b'tzipor dror askin. When the Mishnah says that a bird in a house is not trapped, we don't mean any kind of bird. We're talking about a tzipor dror. What is a tzipor dror? Well, Rabbi Steinsaltz says it's a sparrow.
In Israel today, in Hebrew, when you refer to a sparrow, you call it a dror.
A dror. Interesting. So it's obviously related to this Mishnaic Hebrew and Talmudic Hebrew. Sipor dror, a entirely wild, untamable bird, a free bird. Lefisha eina mekabeles marus. There is something unique about a sparrow who will never cooperate in its in being domesticated. Could we say the same about other birds? Possibly, but let's see the Gemara now. Rashi, b'tzipor jar, mas nisin, diktani tzipor labayis loy. When our Mishnah asserts that just because there's a bird in your house, it is untrapped. The tzipor jor askinim. We're talking about a kind of bird which always evades capture. Shedarka lader babayis kibasada v'nishmetas mizavis lazavis. This is the kind of bird that wherever it goes, it has the same spirit. It may be in your home, it may be outside. It doesn't view itself as captured. And this probably would be a nice mashal, a parable for the human spirit or the ideal human spirit. Regardless of its circumstances, it needs to see itself as free, but we'll hold off on that for another time. So the Gemara, but the Gemara asserts it's sipor dror. If it's flying around your house, you don't actually have it in your shlita. You don't have it in your jurisdiction, in your control. It's not captured. And the other text.
What happens in a situation where you have, let's say, shrubbery or twine, and a bird gets either entwined in the shrubbery or in the twine, and it wasn't your intention to use it as a trap.
Right.
Is it considered trap, not trap?
No, I mean, obviously we're talking about it, and you did the act intentionally. If an animal becomes entangled, you've done nothing. You have not done a malacha. Here we're talking, there has to be some kind of proactive efforts to get the animal into your domain. The question becomes now, doctor, now that there is an animal that's entangled, what can and what may you not do in either further taking possession of the animal or freeing it? That's a good question.
So it's like the story with the deer walking into your house. The minute you close the door, you're entrapped.
So when you close the door, you did a proactive act to secure the deer. And let me tell you something. If you don't want that deer in your house, you are certainly not locking that door. You're going to keep the door wide open and try to show the deer to the door. Because if you thought having a bull in your china closet was no fun, believe me, a deer is not that far behind. You're going to have to do a lot of repairs if you have a deer running around your house. Rabbi Beryl?
Rabbi, I think one of the practical problems with a bird is you're not sure it's trapped. You know, a bird could find a hole, go out a window. It's not a cage is a cage, but a bird in a house is far from being in a cage.
Listen, I told you when I was in yeshiva in Kfar Chabad in Israel, there were birds flying around almost every day, just flying around. Believe me, they didn't feel that they were trapped. The yeshiva students, there probably were yeshiva students who felt much more trapped than the birds there. I'm not saying every yeshiva student felt trapped, but I'm sure the birds were incredibly free. And I think there were even windows up that they could just simply come in and out. There were probably nests in the high ceiling of the yeshiva. And so you're right. That's what we're saying. Certain kinds of birds, many kinds of birds, are mechuser maaseh. There has to be another step before they are in your jurisdiction. The Tanar Debei Rabbi Yishmael, and indeed, there's a teaching from the school of Rabbi Yishmael that says like this: Lama nikra shma tzipor dror. Why is a sparrow called a tzipor dror? Yes, doctor, in modern Hebrew, just a dror. Mipnei shadara babayis kabasada. They do not differentiate. They don't feel more or less free, whether they're in a home or in the field. There's no domestication process. So dror means they are dar. They dwell everywhere. Well, it reminds me, and it's on my mind, the previous Rebbe was in the beginning of well, not in the beginning, but relatively closer to the beginning than the end of the communist revolution. He's ultimately imprisoned and almost executed for spreading Judaism under those circumstances. And he's taken by train at a certain point from one holding place to another. And somehow there were some Hasidim that found out, they had some intelligence, and they find out that the previous Rebbe is at the train station. He's on the way. Actually, it's in the middle of the process. He already had been, the death penalty had already been waived, and now he's being sent for, I think, 10 years of labor in some far off place. And he sees those Hasidim, and he makes like a short sicha, a short declaration. And he said, Nitmut on Zervelin, not with our own intention or consent did we go into Gullus. And the truth of the matter is that the true resolution and redemption from the Gullus is also not going to be in our hands, it's in Hashem. But we have to remember one thing. When a Jew is in Gullus, it is only their body that's in exile. Their body, he was a prisoner. They were taking him from one place to another. But he says the soul, the human spirit, that no one can capture and no one can put into captivity. And so this is the human spirit. So anyway, certainly we can find inspiration from the Tzipor Dror, which is not Mikabel Marut. You put me here, you put me there. I'm free as ever. And so therefore, now we have conflicting texts. One saying that a bird is only trapped.
Just a comment on modern times, that this is a very optimistic statement by the previous Rebbe. Today we see many Jewish and non-Jewish souls that are captured by propaganda, media or state propaganda, who are deprived from their own opinion because their own soul is replaced by a construct created from the outside. And this is probably the worst exile.
Yeah. So I should say, I think you're right. People are losing their independence. They're not only their independence of where they live, but even worse, you're saying if they lose their ability to form independent, critical ideas. So I think the previous Rebbe was not saying a fact as much as a ideal or a wish. It can be, if a person is willing to resist, they can have their soul free, notwithstanding circumstances. But you're right. Sometimes kindness can be a whole lot more, ultimately, persuasion and kindness can be a whole lot more. I don't want to use the word, it's not coercive, but it could be corrosive of a person's independence of spiritual or opinion, etc. So that is a fair point. And as a matter of fact, when domesticating animals as well, there's a lot of mind games that are played in order to remind the animal that they are not independent. And anyways, so the interesting thought to consider. And I guess we'll all take it the way that makes sense for us. Gemara now has another comment. Remember something. We said that there's a contradiction about animals, and there's a contradiction about birds. So animals, that's not a problem. We have Rabbi Yehuda, and we have the Rabbanan. Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah says that a deer and a chaya generally is only trapped when it's in a house, but not when it's in a bivar or in a gan, in a garden. And the Chachamim say that even in a garden it's trapped, or in a courtyard or a bevar. And so we said simply the two contradictory texts in Masechet Beya about Yantif, if an animal is considered trapped or not, will depend on how you view trapping an animal in the context of Shabbos. As far as birds, we cannot say the same thing because everybody agrees that in the Mishnah that a bird needs to be trapped in a cage. And Sligmar says, yeah, everybody agrees that an animal that's incredibly free-spirited needs to actually be in a cage. But other kinds of birds, and maybe like I'm thinking like chickens, you might have a situation where they can become kind of domesticated and they become associated with the space. So if you have it in the house, it's already part of your house. So anyway, so the Gemara had two contradictions, one about animals, one about birds. The contradiction about animals, we said, is a reflection of the two different opinions in the Mishnah. The machlokes about birds, we said, is a reflection of two different kinds of birds, which is reflective of the two different ways to resolve an apparent contradiction between two texts. Either it's two opinions or two scenarios. The Gemara says now, now that we've explained the birds as two different kinds of birds, we now can employ the same reasoning and the same formula to chaya achaya nami kasha. We can also explain the animals to be talking about two different situations. Let's say that we're talking about a large animal enclosure and a small animal enclosure. When it comes to a large animal enclosure, it's not trapped. It's still very free. Monkey, maybe not monkey jungle, but you have, I don't know, I'm thinking about lion country safari. You have a massive, vast area where the wildebeest and the antelopes can run around. Now, ultimately, they can't go wherever they can't go wherever you want, but they are certainly free to evade you for a while. And but then you have a zoo where, unfortunately for the animal, it's a terrible thing. The animal is just trapped in a small space. And so bevar gadol, bevar katan. If the animal is in a large enclosure, well, it's not fully trapped. And if it's in a bevar gadol katan, it's trapped. So the Mishnah says that the Mishnah in Beitza, which says the animal in the bevar is not trapped, you're not allowed to trap it further because it's a small bit. I'm sorry. The Mishnah says, let me scroll back. What did the Mishnah say? Not our main Mishnah, the Mishnah we quoted here. Sadin chayav va'of, that an animal, a chay and a off, is considered already to have been trapped if it's in a bevar. So the Mishnah, it says that it's considered already trapped. We're talking about a small bevar. It's a small enclosure. The animal is already captured, and now you can interact with it as it's already been trapped. But when the Brisa says that you are not allowed, it's considered free. We're talking about a bevar gadol, a large enclosure, and therefore the animal is still needs to be trapped. Rashi, bevar katan masnisin dehacha, the Mishnah and Beya. The ha masnisin debeisa bevar gadol. Oh, I'm gonna have to take that back. In Beya, I suppose it says the animal is trapped. We're talking about a small bevar. When the animal is not allowed to be trapped, we're saying you're not allowed to trap it in a small bevar. So if it's in a small enclosure, it's trapped. If it's in a large enclosure, it is not yet trapped. That's the bottom line, as the Gemara now explains it. Now the Gemara is going to ask the question that all of us are wondering. Give us some practical descriptions, definitions. What is a small bevar? What is a big Bavarian? What is a small Bavarian? What is a big enclosure, a small enclosure? Does it have to do with the size, square feet? Does it have to do with the style, the size, if it's a commercial grade or personal, I don't know, or for a home. So let's see. Heichidami gadol, heichidami bevar katan. Amar Ravashi. So we're going to have three different ways to understand this. Then we'll have to discuss if they are different or similar, just different. Someone's trying to say, I'm sorry. Someone saying something? Again, a reminder, most of you are muted, but I hope you'll unmute to weigh in. Amar Ravashi. Kol heicha derohit basrei. Anytime that you can chase after the animal, umati le bechat shichya, and in one lunge, as Rabbi Steinfeld says, in one lunge, the animal has now been, you're holding it, that's a bevar katan. It's small enough that it's like a little ring. You just lunge at it and you've caught it. Rashi, shichya, mirutza shishochel lechos. But when you lunge down, when you bend down to grab it, it's there. V'idach, but if it's so large that you're not able to just catch it at a moment's notice, bevar gadol, that's considered a large enclosure, a large bevar. And therefore it's still free, it's not trapped, and then you need to trap it if you want to actually have it. Inami, alternatively. So this is a little bit more subjective, but it describes the space is so small that you can catch the animal. Inami, kol heicha the nafil tula, the ksola mahadadi. We're talking about an enclosure so small that the shadows are cast from one end of the structure to the other. So the sun passes and the shadows of one wall are cast onto the other wall. Larger the space, the less likely, and at some point, it does not happen that the shadow lands all the way on the other wall. So if it's very small, the walls are close to one another, well then the shadow is cast. I'm not saying that these two things are a disagreement. It could be that we're describing the same thing, but in different terms. In one, we're describing practically catching the animal. In the other, we're describing how the walls are so close that the shadows are cast from one to the other. So when the shade, if the shadows fall from one wall to the other, bevar katan, then it's a small enclosure, v'idach bevar gadol. But if it's so large that the shadow is not cast from one wall to the other, this is considered a bevar gadol. V'inami, a third definition to distinguish between a large and small bevar, or biber, however you want to pronounce it. Any enclosure that does not have little corners and places where the animal can kind of meander and disappear, bevar katan. So you have one single open space. V'idach, but if it has all different nicks, corners, and spaces, bevar gadol. So I think we can say on good authority that a place like Lion Country Safari, if you're familiar with that, would certainly be classified as a bevar gadol. Some zoos that have the animal in a very small enclosure, I suspect that would be considered a bevar katan. All right, help me out, folks. Give me some thoughts. Give me some agree, disagree. I want to hear some feedback here. What do you say?
I have a deer at home.
You have a deer at home?
Yeah.
Does it
She
run around or
cooks.
is it stuffed? Oh, your
No,
deer.
she
Okay.
she cooks. She cooks.
Is she free?
She cleans.
Windows.
Windows too.
Oh,
She even kisses me now and then.
Interesting. Toysus makes an important point. He says, once upon a time, there was a uniform dimensions for walls. In the time of the Gemara, there was a standard size that the Bevar had. And so what Toysus is saying is if you put a 20-foot wall, its shadow is going to cast a whole lot further than if it's 3 feet tall. And so this is not very precise measure. So Toysus says, you're right. But in the time of the Mishnah, in the time of the Gemara, there was a specific size. And so Toysus isn't telling us what that specific size is. He's just telling us that this had a whole lot more weight and meaning in the time of the Gemara. What does that do for us? I guess it keeps us wondering. Keeps us thinking.
We feel trapped.
You feel trapped? Don't feel trapped. Don't feel trapped. Let me see if I can get you any more data on this. And then in a second, we're going to see Rabbi Gamliel's opinion about the Bevar as well. Before we continue, we're going to see a little more talk about a third opinion in the Mishnah about a bivar. And it actually expresses explicitly the subjective or the fluid nature of a bivar. We've been translating based on our Steinsaltz that a tzipor drawer is a sparrow. And indeed, as the doctor pointed out, in modern Hebrew, a drawer is a sparrow. But we should point out that really there are varying opinions on the identity of the sparrow within the tradition here. So the Aramaic translation, which is, I believe, I'm not sure. I think either it's associated with Onkelos or perhaps it's associated with Rabbi Yonasan ben Uziel. They translate a tzipor drawer as a bird from the pigeon dove family, which would be a kosher bird, as opposed to a sparrow, which I don't think is kosher. The Radak has another word in Hebrew called a snunit, and yet others call it. The Ramban says that it's a whole different. It's a description that applies to many kinds of birds. And then we have our perspective that Rabbi Steinsaltz embraces, which is based on the Mitzvah Sion, I believe, which says that a tzipor drawer is a atleif, which I think we translate many times as a sparrow. So I just want to point out that although we embraced for the purpose of explaining the Gemara that it was a specific word, yesterday when I introduced it, I was following the way the Ramban explains it, which is it's many kinds of birds which all have a common characteristic that they cannot be tamed. But you have other kinds of birds that are more domesticatable by nature. And I think chickens are probably the primary instance, but I suppose in the times of the Gemara, there were other birds as well that were more likely to be able to bring into the house and capture and remain docile and cooperative. And so anyway, so that's that. Now let's continue. The Gemara continues. So until now, we explained that in the Mishnah, there were two opinions, Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. They agree that a bird needs to be captured, trapped in a migdal, but there's a discussion about precisely when a tzvi, a wild deer, is considered captured. Now, why do we talk about a tzvi? Well, because a domesticated animal is obviously contained. Here we're talking about a wild animal, which is not usually or automatically within jurisdiction. And so for kosher animals, a deer was pretty much the primary option in those days. I know we probably could have said an antelope, which I think was prevalent in those times. Maybe tzvi includes, maybe it includes those other kinds of wild animals, all generally called a chaya, wild animal. Anyways, but now we're going to go to the third opinion, the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, who says that we have to differentiate and identify each bevar. Not all are identical, as Rabbi Steinsaltz paraphrases. It depends whether the trapping of the animal is inadequate or it is already adequately trapped. We'll just take a fast peek in the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Lo kol bevarim shavin. Not every bevar is the same. Zaklam chusr tzeda. If the animal is still on the wild, it's still on the run, and you have to actively trap it from within the bevar, patur, you haven't yet trapped it. But it's already effectively in your control. It's already trapped. Chayav. So let's see what the Gemara does with this. Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. They say that halacha ki Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. The halacha follows Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, which is that it really depends. It really depends. It really depends on the specific nature of the enclosure. Amarli Abaya has an interesting question to Rav Yosef. Halacha. Whenever you need to assert that one of the three quotes is the halacha, Michlal de Pligi, from here I infer that there is a machlokes between Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and the rabbis, the quotes before him, Rabbi Yehuda and Chacham. Amar lei, my nafkan chamina. So Rabbi Yehuda, I guess, or they asked, how do you know that this is a machlokes? So here we get a very interesting line. Amar lei, response is Gemara, Gemor, Zmarta Tehei. Do you think the Gemara is simply a sing-song and includes words without intention, without precision, if they're saying the same thing, it needn't be repeated. You think it just stam includes or states words just in a sing-song manner? Of course, the quoting of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is to teach us a different perspective. And so ultimately, yeah, somehow there is a machlokes between Rabban Shimon Gamliel and Rabbi Yehuda. What is that machlokes? What's going to be that machlokes? Or actually, what I think is happening is Abaya hold on, let me see something. I guess by extension, Abaya is trying to say that we incorrectly asserted that Rabbi Yehuda, when he says that something can be captured in the Beivar, we're talking about a small Beivar. But that can't be, because that's what Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is saying. And so Abaya is by extension trying to say that really Rabbi Yehuda is talking about all types of Beivarim. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, Dafka a small Beivar. And if you'd ask me, I think that Abaya has a very compelling explanation, to the point where I wonder if the halachists, well, anyways, we pass on the Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, but I wonder if the commentaries would suggest that our Gemara actually refutes Rav Yosef's and our Gemara's take on explaining that Rabbi Yehuda is talking about a Beivar Katan. And now we would read our Mishnah as follows. The first opinion says that an animal has to be a wild animal, can only be considered trapped if it's in a home. Rabbi Yehuda says an animal is trapped in a Beivar even if it's big. And Rav Shimon Gamliel says it's not so simple. If it's in a big Beivar, it is free. It's still not trapped. If it's a small Beivar, it is captured. And that, I suppose, is how Abaya would learn the Gemara. And we get a bonus of this cute line. Forgive me for saying cute. Gemara, Zamarta Tehei. Do you suppose that the style of the Mishnah is just to simply tell us a song? No, obviously, it's coming to teach us three distinct ideas. And therefore, we have to differentiate between the viewpoint, the way Rabbi Yehuda expresses it, and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel.
Rabbi, I have a simple question for you.
Go ahead.
What if we have a problem of animals coming into our backyard and eating all the flowers and the shrubs and everything else, and we set a trap?
Okay.
And the animal happens to step into the trap on Shabbos.
Okay.
Are we chayav for that?
Good question. You're asking if you just have a trap out, but you've done nothing. It's passive. When did you set up the trap?
During the week sometime.
Good question. I don't think so. Good question. I don't think so. Now let's do something real fast, and then we're going to call it a day. Let's do a little bit of a halachic survey of the Shulchan Aruch. Hold on.
It's very interesting that Rabbi Steinsaltz calls it parroting. If you look at his translation,
Where?
I guess he has a sense of humor.
Probably. Oh, you're saying talking about parrots. Let's see the Shulchan Aruch, Code of Jewish Law, Shin Tez Zayin 316, very beginning. Say the Hasura of Materis B'Shabbos. Is there a permissible and forbidden kind of trapping? Hasad, Sipor, Dror. If one traps a wild bird, untamable, the migdal into a cage, and it's trapped. Ushar tziporim, utzvila bias, or other kinds of birds, or a deer into a home. Or if it's in a vivarium, in a enclosure, that they can genuinely be considered to be trapped, reflecting the voice of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Chayiv, the person is chayiv. The im eino nitzod bo, if it is not fully trapped, it's in a preserve, but the animals are essentially free. Pater aval asar, you should not do so, but it would not be considered a biblical act of Shabbos desecration. And so here we see clearly the perspective of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel being embraced in this discussion. What does the Rambam say? Any place where the animal is in it and you can catch it in one swipe. Or if the shade is so high, is so close that it casts from one end to the other. Well, actually, because this is in the middle of a halacha, so that's really. But anyways, you get the point. He summarizes our Gemara here. We should back up. Backing up. To trap something that is commonly trapped, you're chayiv. You go in chaya, oifos, dogim, wild birds, wild animals, fish. The problem is, or the caveat is, it needs to be contained in something that the job of trapping is done. For example, you chased a deer until it enters a house. You lock the door, as Dr. Stalman pointed out. Or you chase the bird to fly until it flew into its cage. Or you swept out a fish in a bucket of water. He is chayiv because in all of these instances the animal cannot escape. But if you chase the bird into your house and you lock the door, or you chase the fish into a small stream or pond of water, or you chased the deer into a large palatial structure, which interestingly enough, here he translates it as a gazelle. In all of these instances, the animal has yet to be fully in your custody. When he actually wants to do something with it, although the deer is now contained in a smaller space, he still needs to run after it to catch it. Therefore, for example, when it comes to trapping a lion, which is a very hard animal to tame, you're only chayiv once it's actually in its cage. And then the Rambam continues what we read before. If it's in a space that's so small that you can lunge it for it in one lunge, you've got it, or the walls are very small, this is considered a makam katan. So interestingly, the Rambam paskins using the paradigm conveyed in the Gemara, not the final perspective which is conveyed in the name of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. And anyways, okay, there we go. So that's that, my dear friends. This concludes today's session of the Talmud, all about the art of trapping. Not all enclosures are created equal. And
Rabbi,
yes,
one fast remark back to the question of kavana.
yes.
You try to trap a bird, it comes in your house, but the bird escapes. Have you committed a
Is it a kind of bird? So I think we're going to differentiate between what kind of bird it is. Is it a bird that is now stuck and is going to accept its new circumstance or not?
No,
Anyways,
your
we'll talk.
intention was to trap
Hold on,
it,
we're not. I
but
just
the
want to say
animal's intention is not to be trapped, so
I
he
just
gets
wanna-
out.
we are not yet done with the discussion of trapping. So let's be on the lookout next week as we do the next Mishnah to see what additional facts and halachic opinions we can glean with Hashem's help in the story of trapping.
Let's say you go fishing and you don't catch anything.
Yeah, I hear you. With Hashem's help, we'll resume Monday.
Okay, good Shabbos. Good
Shkoyach.
Chodesh.
Shabbos, like it's Chodesh. Let's hear only good news.
Hope for
Shalom Ber
peace.
Chumash. All right, Chumash. We'll end. And Shalom, you want to start Chumash now or wait 5 minutes? All right, so Chumash will resume in just a moment. Shkoyach. Thank you. Have a wonderful day and a good Shabbos.